Breaking news out of New York today. Official word that one of the travelers with visas being detained at New York's JFK airport has been released. Congressman Jerry Nadler explained what happened just in the last hour.
They got on board a plane before the executive order was issued, and when they got off the plane here, they were detained. People here are acting pursuant to the guidance that they've gotten from Washington, which apparently is not very clear guidance, and they've asked for further guidance from Washington, and they're working short-staffed since it's Saturday to give them that guidance as to whether the president's executive order is to be held to supersede those visas.
Joining me now to talk about it is Nayyera Haq, former State Department spokesperson and former White House senior director. Let's dig in here. He keeps using this word guidance. What is the guidance? Because right now it seems kind of messy.
Well, and that seems to be what's really confusing people, not only here in Washington, but also the folks who have to implement this policy at places like JFK and at Customs and Border Control. And so the real challenge is that it seems in the rush to meet his campaign promises, the president released these executive orders, but did not really coordinate with the agencies or giving them information on how they're supposed to implement it. And there are sections of the order that are relatively vague that mention immigrants. Now, does that mean green card holders? Does that mean people just coming here for visits? What about the folks who are traveling for business? There's even stories of people who are on their way in planes who have been turned around. Now, if this is all in the interest of preventing terrorism, I think that we all have an interest in that, but it seems that in the rush to be politically correct and to meet campaign promises, we're actually being cruel and hurting several people who are trying to help the United States.
Right.
Today's example, right, perfect example was this gentleman Hamid, who was just released, but he's just one of many that the United States, that the State Department and military folks have been working for years to let in on what's called special immigrant visas. And these are the visas for interpreters, people who have risked their lives to stand alongside U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and who have to wait, frankly, a lot longer than a businessman from China to try to come into the U.S. and start a new life.
Well, take me behind the scenes. I don't know how much you know, but don't they realize, I mean, there were people who got on airplanes before the executive orders were issued, and there was also an argument that a lot of these people, or all of these people, were already vetted.
Exactly. So this, again, is several years-long process to get a special immigrant visa. People from the countries that are targeted in this executive order have never really had an easy time since 9/11 to even get a visa to this country. So the State Department and our embassies and consular officials, mind you, these are non-political appointees. These are people whose job it is to do vetting, have really been diligent about the work that they've done. And this is year-long that people have been waiting to try to get here. And suddenly, out of really nowhere, there's a draft that circulated for maybe 24 hours, and then a final order was passed down without any coordination with ambassadors, everywhere from ambassadors down to the person who's sitting at the ticket window and having to answer questions from people. No one really knows what this means. So it seems like there are people who voted for Donald Trump who expected this to happen, and the president made a campaign promise he wanted to keep. But in the rush to do that, there's been zero logistic coordination, and it seems now we have mayhem at airports and at key critical points when, frankly, these officers should be able to do their jobs effectively.
Congressman Nadler, he just spoke at a press conference not too long ago, and he said that he believes this is religious discrimination. And I should mention, you're a practicing Muslim. You spoke on behalf of the U.S. government at one point. How are you feeling about what's going on today when you look at these pictures of the protests? And I don't know if you were able to hear the protests, but I mean, these people, their voices, the attorney, his voice was quivering. I mean, people are so upset.
Well, I'm a natural-born U.S. citizen from a suburb of New York City, and have always been proud about my American heritage and, frankly, the gift that living in America has given me and my family. And that was what drove me to public service and the appreciation for diversity and freedom of religion and freedom of press. So it's concerning to see, after having worked in our government to represent two places like the Middle East and South Asia, what the beauty of America is, to hear things coming from the White House about torture, about banning people based on religion. It's not the America that I think many of us have come to appreciate, and frankly, many of our men and women in the armed services have fought to defend. So I stand with my friends in the military who are also saying that this is not, we fight for our freedoms, and it's freedom for all, and that these are the values that make us American and that make us proud to be a beacon of hope for the rest of the world.
Nayyera, with that said, we realize that so many people, and frankly maybe people watching right now, do share concerns about vetting and people coming into this country. So can you talk about that? I mean, obviously there are fears, there are problems with homegrown terrorism and what have you. Is there perhaps a more effective way to keep this country secure, or is it too difficult to do on a case-by-case basis? What are your thoughts?
And that is the irony of this, is that we are all standing strong against terrorism, finding a way to prevent radicalization in the United States and for radical elements to come here. But this executive order actually doesn't target the specific countries where we're seeing those challenges. For example, in Iraq, the front line with our military support, the front line of this war are Muslims. And you have in Syria people who are fleeing a brutal dictatorship and regime, and they're fleeing for their lives. So these are not necessarily terrorists that we're talking about. And in fact, the country where 9/11 hijackers was 11 out of 13 of the hijackers were Saudi citizens. But Saudi Arabia is not on the list for banning. Places in South Asia, not on the list for the ban. Why? We can only wonder that there are political and business interests that this administration has in those areas. So it's targeting countries that, frankly, will cater to the fear of Americans and not necessarily answer any of our foreign policy and counterterrorism challenges.
Nayyera Haq, thank you for your time and your perspective today.
Good to be here.